Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tech Tuesday. And it's my favorite time of the week where I get to dive a little bit deeper and to share a little bit more knowledge on nutrition and the various different aspects of nutrition. And we started last week on a new series for April. And I know it was the end of March, but still. And I'm talking about protein, which protein it's our base. When we look at each other, we're looking at protein. And there's different forms of protein. And I covered the very basics last week. And I'm going to cover the rest now, just to explain a little bit more about what it is, what we need to look for, how it works, how it doesn't work, etc. So let me share my screen. And okay. So we're talking about protein, the good, the bad, and why do we actually need it? There you go. So one of the things that we find about the absorption of protein, and if you missed last week, please go back and watch the recording. But I ended off talking about what depletes protein and the absorption of protein, because as I've often said, we can take whole bottles full of supplements or medication for that matter, but if you aren't absorbing it, pretty pointless. So in order for anything to work efficiently, your body has to be able to absorb it. And we've started covering a few things about what prevents this absorption. One of them was medicine. And this week we're going to start on the hydrochloric acid deficiency. Now, the production of hydrochloric acid tends to decline with age. And hydrochloric acid is what we have in our gut. If you took out the acid from your stomach and poured it onto a piece of wood or a piece of paper or something like that, it would burn a literal hole through it. And for that matter, if you pour it onto your skin, you'll have a very nasty burn because hydrochloric acid is equivalent to battery acid. Now think of that in your stomach. And think of how good the design of the stomach wall is to prevent that acid from burning through. Now, a wide variety of nutrient deficiencies, which become more common with aging, can impair the production of hydrochloric acid. Now, if your acid levels are low, you're not going to be able to digest food correctly, and therefore you will not be able to absorb that food correctly. Bouts of illness can temporarily depress stomach acid secretion. One common infection which has profound effect on stomach acid secretion is the overgrowth of the bacteria called Helicobacter pylori bacteria, which is responsible for ulcers. And they used to say, if you were stressed, you would get an ulcer, or an ulcer was caused by excess stress. So technically, I suppose you could say this is still the case, because when you're stressed, your vitamin B levels are decreased and the acid levels change. And this is where the issues come about. And so the lining of the stomach becomes thinner, and this is where the ulcer becomes more prominent because the acid is now burning through. Now, hydrochloric acid deficiency can result in digestive distress, belching, heartburn, and ulcer-like symptoms. So you could have the same sort of symptoms as an ulcer, but it's not a true ulcer. And in order to get the correct diagnosis, you do need to see a suitably qualified physician who will generally put a scope. So in other words, make you swallow a camera so they can see exactly what's happening in your gut. Not fun, but quite effective. Other symptoms include intolerance to fats, nausea, burning tongue, metallic taste in your mouth, and bad breath. A deficiency of stomach acid can also cause constipation or diarrhea. all of these things are symptoms. So in order to work out what the problem is, you need to work out what the problem isn't. So now we get to the actual quality of the protein. We've covered what protein is, and we know everybody talks about protein, and your skin is protein, and your hair is protein, and your nails are protein. But you get, like with everything, you get different qualities of protein. And we are looking for the best quality protein in order for our body to utilize it to the best extent. And quality protein is getting a whole lot harder to find these days. Corn-fed meats are saturated with inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids. Now, I will say that we are, and I'm not too sure about Durban, but I think Durban also qualifies, but I know where I am, we are fortunate to be able to access, I would say, organically grown meat, because it's generally considered free range, where you go drive past a farm and you see cattle busy grazing nice, contentedly and comfortably on vast fields of the correct grass. Now, when they talk about corn-fed meats, what that is, it's almost like battery chickens. You've heard about these chickens where you've got about 50 to 100 chickens piled up on top of each other in small little cages, and that's where they literally spend their life. Now, in some areas, this happens with cattle as well, where they are put into relatively small kraals, for want of a better terminology, or little areas, and they're fed corn, which is GMO, and they're fed all sorts of synthetic stuff in order to fatten them. And obviously, we are getting that when, obviously we get what the cattle have been fed. So this is where the problem comes about. But in your free-range cattle, or free-range venison for that matter, the protein is a lot better because you don't have all this fake stuff going into them. Government agencies have attempted to eradicate raw milk, again, because of all sorts of different things. They're trying to protect us, but unfortunately, that doesn't always work as effectively. Now, to achieve a high-quality protein, both quality raw materials and processing technology are of great importance, if not vital importance. Like with anything, if you want to have a quality building, for instance, you're not going to have cheap, secondhand, trashy bricks and cement, because your end result is not going to be very good. Now, if our body is made of protein, you don't want junk going in there to create your body, because remember, you are what you eat. Now, protein structure and nutritional value is damaged by high temperature, acids, or bases. So there's a lot of things that can damage it or destroy it. The Protogard process, which is something that Neolife uses exclusively, protects the amino acids by blending high-quality raw materials at low temperatures and allowing plant-based enzymes to pre-digest the protein, which is why they will say that in the Neolife shake that we use, part of the protein, because technically it's made up of 3 different proteins, and one of those is in a pre-digested format, which means that your body can absorb it significantly quicker. So now the next question is, are you getting enough protein? Now, your daily protein intake, for normal healthy eating, you're needing about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So figure out what your body weight is, and you can then work out how many grams of protein you need per day. You don't supplement if you're getting sufficient. So check out your weight, check out your protein, what are you eating? Are you eating meat? Are you eating plant-based proteins? Are you eating fish? Are you eating chicken? All that sort of thing. And if you're not getting enough, specifically quality protein, then supplement. Now, this varies. So for endurance runners, like think of guys running comrades, and active individuals, so people on the go all the time, they're needing about 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So all your athletes. Now, for your gym people, specifically the bodybuilders who are wanting to gain muscle and they're doing intense training, they call it HIIT, which is high impact intensive training. They're needing closer to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. And for weight loss and muscle gain, you're needing about 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So it really depends on what the individual is doing as to how much protein they actually need. Now, according to the USDA, they recommend a daily consumption of 1 gram of good quality protein per kilogram of body weight daily. Higher amounts of up to 50% higher are recommended for those trying to lose weight or build lean muscle. So if you're on a diet, and I really don't like that word diet, but rather think of it as a healthy eating plan, you're needing more. Studies show that higher protein diets help to suppress hunger and increase satiety and burn fat, thereby promoting weight loss and making it easier to stay on a weight loss program. Any diet, or let me rephrase that, virtually any or most diets will work. The question is, are they sustainable and are they helping you to lose weight correctly from the correct areas? Because if not, it's pretty pointless getting going, because then you end up with this so-called yo-yo dieting, which is extremely unhealthy. It's a good idea to get 20 to 25% of your daily calories from a complete high-quality protein that has all 22 amino acids involved in human nutrition. Last week we covered this, and we said that in order for a protein to be complete, it needs to have all 22 amino acids, because that way your body can absorb it correctly. Try to get protein in every meal and snack to meet your personalized daily target. And then if you're not getting enough protein that way, specifically good protein, then you go to a protein shake. Now, we'll cover a little bit, and we'll go into the rest of it at some stage as well, but we're going to look at sports protein specifically. And I'd like to cover this now because obviously being in South Africa, we know South Africans are generally sports crazy, and a lot of people enjoy taking part in sports. And specifically around about this time, people are practicing heavily for Comrades Marathon, which is coming up, I think in May, so in a couple of months' time. May or June, I'm not too sure exactly when. It's not that far away. So these guys are already doing a lot of extra work at the moment, and therefore they need a better source of sports protein. So when you're leading an active lifestyle, getting the right balance of the macro and the micronutrients is critical. If you've ever watched a motor racing team, you will see, I've had the privilege of, when we used to sponsor the motorbikes at one stage, I was fortunate enough to spend time in the pits with them at one of the meetings that they had locally. And they are measuring everything in those machines to the micrometer for the mechanical side of things. And when it comes to the fuel, down to the last milliliter. And if they see if they can tweak a little bit here and get a little bit more out of the fuel, they can use less fuel to get less weight, which gives them a better chance of winning. And the edge of winning, or the difference between the first guy over the line and the last guy, is usually just a couple of seconds. But if they can eke out that extra split second, it makes all the difference. Now, if they can do that with machines, why do we think that this machine that we live in is any different? Why do they start to fill your body with all sorts of junk if you're taking part in sports, specifically things like comrades? We need to put the correct nutrients into this machine so that you can get the correct performance with the least amount of damage. And I know I don't do comrades. I believe that's why the wheel was invented, but I do the short runs. I do park run amongst other things. And if my diet hasn't been correct and I skip a couple of things that I shouldn't do, I end up in pain because I start ending up with problems in my knees and my ankles and my feet and all sorts of different things. So I know that it's very important to get the correct fuel into my body before I go for a run, and then refuel it afterwards and make sure that it's operating correctly. Intense exercise depletes your body of nutrients, energy, and protein. So replacing those nutrients is necessary to prevent deficiencies that can negatively impact health. Athletes and trainers alike know that peak nutrition status is an integral component of optimal sports performance, and that high quality nutrition can give you the competitive edge needed to train, perform, and recover. If you've ever watched the Olympic Games and you watch the 100-meter sprint, for instance, the difference between the guy that comes in first and the guy that comes in last, and there's usually only about 6 runners, the difference between competitor number 1 and competitor number 6 is usually a point of a second. That point of a second makes all the difference between a few $1 million coming in sponsorship and your name not being recognized at all. Does anybody know who currently the fastest runner in the world is in the 100-meter sprint according to the Olympic Games? If my memory is correct and if I'm up to date with my knowledge, it's Usain Bolt. Who's the guy that came in second? Nobody remembers him. But when he came in second, he was literally a split second behind Usain Bolt. That's the difference between quality nutrition and slightly, very, very slightly off kilter. It's that competitive edge. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that come into play as well. But when you look at these guys, you see that their nutrition is absolutely crucial. And in fact, most sports teams these days have a clinical nutritionist on staff, along with the medical doctor and the physiotherapist, amongst other things. These teams and sports have become extremely technical. But with so many products out there, how do you choose the one that's right for you? Because what works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. And you might need X amount, I might need Y amount, and the next guy might need Z amount. So it really depends. Everybody is different. So where are your optimal protein sources? High quality protein is needed for effective maintenance, repair, and synthesis of skeletal muscle. Because remember, no matter what you're doing, if you're walking, if you're working out, if you're playing sport, in order to get there, there's a breakdown in your skeletal muscle. This is how your muscle grows. It gets stressed, it gets damaged, and it gets repaired. Just like if you break a bone, your body repairs it and then reinforces it. Same with our muscles. They've got to get broken down in order to get repaired. To date, milk-based proteins like whey and casein are superior to other sources of proteins because they are complete proteins, meaning that they contain all the essential amino acids Remember, you get essential and non-essential. And essential means that they have to come from the diet. Non-essential means that your body could synthesize them. And these essential amino acids, together with high amounts of bioavailable leucine and branched chain amino acids, or BCAAs, are important for muscle synthesis and retention. Whey is digested quickly, so amino acids are rapidly available and utilized by the body for recovery, and it has the highest levels of branched chain amino acids found in nature. So anytime that you are speaking to an athlete, be it at the gym, be it a professional athlete, and you talk about protein, they're immediately going to ask you, what is the source of your protein? Do you have a specific sports protein, and what is its source? And they really look at it carefully, and they want it to be whey protein. Casein, which is the other milk protein, is digested and absorbed slower than whey, which helps supply the body with protein over a longer period. Think of sustained release, like vitamin B, vitamin C, etc. It is also high in glutamine, which is one of the most prevalent amino acids in the body. The combination of both ensures that protein and key amino acids are readily available when your body needs them. Again, think of a car. When you're driving along, you don't take a teaspoon of fuel and pop it in the carburetor when you need to go, because you're not going to go very far. So you have a fuel tank attached to the car. When you put your foot down on the accelerator, the engine, please don't ask me about all the technicalities because I'm definitely not a mechanic. But basically, when you're driving, your engine or the computer, the microprocessors in the engine works out when fuel needs to get pumped into the engine at the correct time in order to create the small explosion, to create the energy to drive the car. But when you're parked, like a traffic light, for instance, you're not using any fuel. Why? Because the engine isn't needing that boost of energy to cause it to drive. It's literally running in neutral. Same with us. If we're sitting comfortably, not doing anything, we don't need a lot of protein, not for energy for the muscles. But as soon as you start to get up and move, you need sufficient protein available to power the muscles. So that's how that whole lot works. So what are the key amounts of protein? Several studies show that muscle protein synthesis is optimized after an hour of exercise when you consume protein of high biological value, approximately 20 to 30 grams, providing 10 grams of essential amino acids within 0 to 2 hours after exercise. So you can have your protein shake beforehand, but it's more important to have it directly after exercise for repair. However, higher intakes of protein, in other words, more than 40 grams, have not been shown to further improve muscle protein synthesis. So now you literally are just wasting it, because what your body can't use, it's going to get rid of. Very, very simple. So while getting enough protein is important for muscle synthesis, getting more isn't necessarily better. So protein-sparing carbohydrates. Studies show that consuming carbohydrate and protein together results in improved muscle synthesis. Carbohydrate being sugar, sugar being fuel. This is because carbohydrates have a protein-sparing effect, which means that they can act as fuel so that the amino acids from the protein you consume will be used as building blocks for muscle synthesis instead of for energy. Remember what I said? If you are lifting weights, for instance, you are literally tearing the muscles and they need to get repaired. In addition, carbohydrates are an important fuel for muscle and central nervous system. So low levels will be a limiting factor in performance and recovery. So the nutrients you need with no surprise ingredients. Protein shakes should also provide the full spectrum of essential vitamins and minerals to replace lost nutrients and ensure proper metabolism and utilization of protein and carbohydrates. At the same time, they need to avoid unwanted or undesirable components that can pose serious challenges for users in general and athletic users in particular. So remember, athletes don't want any junk in their stuff. They're looking for quality. Contamination or the accidental or intentional inclusion of compounds that violate anti-doping codes for banned substances poses a significant risk for athletes because testing positive for banned substances could lead to disqualification from their sport, even if they were unaware that the supplement contained bad substances. And we so often see that. You see these professional athletes, and the news headline says, so-and-so has been banned for taking stuff that they weren't supposed to. Now, a professional athlete doesn't just get tested before or after the game. They can get tested randomly at any time. So they can be on holiday, so they're between competitions, for instance. So in the off season, we'll talk about rugby, and there's obviously an off season. Those guys are now on holiday, and the sports bodies can phone them up randomly and say, listen, we need a sample from you within the next 12 hours. And they need to produce the sample or they get suspended. Now, when it comes to professional sport, we are talking millions of rands. These guys are at a completely different level to you and I playing tennis over the weekend or playing golf over the weekend. They are a much higher level, and they've got to be very, very, very careful about what they take. And even things like if they've got asthma, for instance, there's certain medications they may not take because it can give an impression that they're taking a stimulant. And that is an instant ban, whether it's for a short period of time or whether it's permanent. That gets decided later. They get a cough or a cold and they take a cough mixture and they happen to do a sample. It will show up that there's something in their system that is considered a stimulant. They may not take it. So when you talk supplements to a professional athlete, don't be surprised if they start asking you all sorts of highly technical questions, because it is literally their livelihood at stake. And they need to know that what you are supplying them is not going to get them fired from their job. Because remember, most athletes only have a limited time period that they can actually partake in sport. And that, in the general scheme of things, is just, comparatively speaking, just a few years. If you think of a rugby player, when they go professional, they normally start around about 18, 19. And an old rugby player is 25 years old. I think the oldest professional rugby player that I'm aware of quit when he was about 37 or 38. And needless to say, he had excellent nutrition. But we all know Warren Brosnan. He retired when he was in his 30s. Not because he was old, but because he was worn out. So they want to know what's in whatever it is you're trying to sell them. Thus, it is vitally important to review the latest research and choose a company like Neolife that meets the quality standards and conducts rigorous testing. And Neolife, without punting them for anybody else who's watching who isn't part of this team, Neolife has a letter stating that none of the ingredients in any of the products that they supply is contraband and will contain any surprise ingredients that could show up with a negative result, because we only use food, non-GMO, and organically grown. Makes all the difference. And that is where I'm going to stop for this week, because we'll get into the timing of the protein next week. So it's not just a matter of what you have, but when you have it as well. So that makes a big difference between, like fuel. You're not going to put in your contaminated fuel just before a race. You make sure everything is completely clean, but you might not fill up. If you're only doing 10 laps, for instance, you're not going to fill up the tank, because it's going to add excess weight. And that's what makes all the difference. So,
thank you, Sean.